Hello, I'm Barbara Levin, past president of the American Association of Legal Nurse Consultants. My friend and colleague, Patricia Iyer, and I are hosting our fifth virtual Legal Nurse Consulting Conference, March 3 and 4, 2022. We invite you to be the detective with our program Crash. This is a case study of a motor vehicle accident. You will uncover the evidence and clues in a motor vehicle accident. You will also learn what information do you need to review when analyzing the data. What information do you need to discover for the event data recorder? What type of information will you find there? And where are the hidden jewels in the medical records? A case scenario will be presented and discussed by multiple specialties, and this includes Arlene Klepatsky. She is a nurse attorney, and she is going to discuss mechanisms of injury. She is a successful litigation attorney and has extensive knowledge about working together with a biomechanical engineer. Welcome.
Hello, Barbara. I'm glad to be here.
Can you discuss further about what types of things the audience will be learning from your program?
Well, the audience will be able to picture what happens in various types of motor vehicle crashes. There are different types with different forces, the rear end collision, the frontal collision, various side impacts, and then the rollover collision. And with the rollover collision and some frontal collisions, even rear end collisions, there can be also ejection with all the additional injuries that can cause. So the LNC will be able to see if the injuries claimed make sense from the types of forces generated by the various configurations of auto crashes.
Now, I understand that you actually have an example to share with our audience right now, which of course we'll be learning so much more having to do with a motor vehicle accident. Can you share that?
Okay, when I was working with the biomechanical engineer, I would get the medical records and do chronologies, and very often past medical history was important because we wanted to see if the injury was pre-existing. And in this particular case, we didn't have, for some reason, past medical history records. But I was looking at the claims versus the forces in the accident. It was a rear-end collision, and there was a 16-year-old boy in the rear passenger seat, the right rear passenger seat. And there was, after the accident, he claimed he had pain in his nose and that he broke his nose. He said, I was thrown forward into the back of the seat and I broke my nose. And the case went on to litigation, and preparing for litigation, I looked at the traffic collision report, which tells me a lot of information about the accident. And I said to myself, but you don't get thrown forward in a rear end collision. You get thrown backwards initially, then there might be some rebound depending on the forces, but the initial movement isn't into the seat back. So I questioned whether or not he could fracture his nose in that. And it turns out when we finally did get the previous record, past medical history records, it turns out that he had been in a wrestling accident the day before. And lo and behold, his father said, oh, maybe the auto insurance can pay to have your nose repaired. So eventually it all came out because the insurance company actually made a complaint of fraud against them. And I lost track of how far it went, but it was really clear that the day before is when he actually fractured his nose, and he had an ER visit, and it was well documented by the ER nurse. And I was able to say, aha, that's where he fractured his nose. It was not in the rear end collision. So I was able, because I knew the forces involved, able to think it through and say, does this make sense? And that way you can maybe solve some mysteries in the case by knowing what happens.
Well, this sounds fascinating. And I understand in the case study that you are going to be presenting has to do with two cars that were in a collision and some individuals who were actually ejected out of the car. And you will help teach people who was the actual driver of the car.
Right. Oftentimes, looking at the injury patterns can actually determine the seat position of a person, because injuries can be specific to seat position depending on what happens afterwards. Of course, the injuries from the rollover that happened and the ejection are going to add some injuries, but very often there are injuries that provide a clue as to who was actually the driver. And it has been known that two people in the front seat of the car would point to the other one and say, I wasn't driving, he was driving, and then, vice versa. So sometimes it is important to be able to look at injuries from a particular seat position and to be able to analyze it.
Well, this sounds so exciting. Do you want to be a detective? Please join us for our LNC Success Conference, March 3 and 4, 2022. Please see our link below, lnc.tips/March 2022 virtual. We look forward to seeing you.